Welcome back to our ongoing coverage of House of the Dragon. We're here today to talk about episode 5 of season 2. The episode is called Regent. As ever, I am joined by my special co-host, Maggie.
Hello.
And his even specialer co-host, Tristan.
Oh, very nice.
Well, okay.
See, Maggie, you dropped the torch into the pool there, and Tristan picked it up, blew on it, and lit it again.
I told you all I wanted to do was just
much.
say hi. It's fine. Go ahead.
So we need to start with, we got to set the table a little bit going into this episode. So if you'll remember the trajectory of this season for us, first 2 episodes did not do it for any of us. Episode 3 and 4, we loved. We thought were incredible. Some of the best moments the show's ever had. Unfortunately, this episode is a return to episodes 1 and 2, but we are not going to spend the episode relitigating those points. I'm just going to take a moment here at the top to say that, yes, we're going straight back to episode 1 and 2. You can rerun all of those issues and conversations if you haven't heard those episodes. It's all the same points. We still don't think they really get Rhaenyra this season at all. See our episode 2 discussion. There's all sorts of off-screen characterization. There's much more silent, sad character B-roll where there's no feeling of interiority. There's an overall sense that, like what happened in the first 2 episodes, the story has gone quiet again. You've got these captivating, engaging actors without any interesting lines to say. We've got the best sets and costumes in the business, but the actors are given almost nothing to work with. We've sung this song before. We're not going to run this again besides this little disclaimer up top. They got the plot from George R. R. Martin, and the work of this dramatization of Fire and Blood is the dialogue, and I think it's not great here. So let's pivot and attempt to meet this episode on its own terms, because I rewatch these to assemble a little recap, just to make sense and make sure I have everything that's going on here. And what I was struck by, scrubbing through it a second time, was the silence. The thing that I sort of used as a critique in previous episodes, and I still think the comparisons to the 2 episodes we liked are pretty unfavorable, but the sheer repetition of those silent moments is incredibly intriguing in this episode. So I want to start there because I think all 3 of us prefer the classic Game of Thrones verbal jousting. There's none of that here. Instead, we swing incredibly explicitly hard in the other direction, where I would say half of this episode is almost like a silent film. And yes, that begets pacing issues and it doesn't really feel earned. But look at this pattern. Listen to these. I'm going to rattle off a few examples.
Okay. Alicent
standing next to Aemond on the ramparts. Totally silent conversation. And then she walks away.
Stunning.
Alicent later at Aegon's bedside. Totally silent. Helena watching Aegon being wheeled in. Silent. Aegon II during an incredibly painful-looking armor removal after he's been all burned. Totally silent. Alicent disassociating during the council meeting after Aemon's ascension. Totally silent. Daemon disassociating during the Riverlands meeting. Silent. Aemond during the council meeting while he's being elevated to this regent position by everyone else. Totally silent. Him later staring at the Iron Throne. Silent. Corlys receiving the pin that makes him Rhaenyra's Hand of the Queen. Silent. Him reacting to Rhaenys' death. Silent. Multiple scenes of the journey of the woman, the Little Red Riding Hood, who's being sent by Rhaenyra into King's Landing. Silent. The dragon head, mouth open, doing this silent scream being wheeled through the city. Silent.
She's dead.
Sure, that's the free square on the bingo card.
Yeah, everybody gets one.
Yeah.
But also the cacophony of the trapped small folk when the gate is closed and they can't get out. They're all screaming, but it's completely unintelligible, and that sort of devolves into the same effect. So to turn this into something productive and throw it to you guys, what do you think is the cumulative effect of all these silences? What do they mean? What are they going for in using this as seemingly a storytelling device here?
Yeah, it's a good question, because when you frame it all together like that, I mean, you want to be generous and think that's got to be intentional. Like, surely that's not an accident that so many important pivotal moments that are happening on screen are doing so silently. So it's got to mean something. I mean, it might have something to do with the lack of control that a lot of people feel, particularly with the small folk. They feel like totally out of, like, as in they don't have any agency, like they have no control over their own lives. a big problem Rhaenyra has, although she does not do this silently, but she is upset that she does not have any agency in the war that's going on. She doesn't feel like she has any control over her council. Again, she's not silent, but everyone else around her is. Daemon's feeling really powerless, and that's why he's doing his little soul-searching journey at Harrenhal. So maybe that's part of it, but even if that's what they're going for, I don't think it's quite doing it, unfortunately. That's all I can think of, though.
For me, I kind of come out on the side of, did you not get my point there? You mean you don't understand what I'm trying to convey to you whenever I'm not talking about it?
Yeah. Just have to guess.
Incredible.
Got it.
So, okay, just as a single example, silence can be incredibly powerful. Picture this. The dream. Give me a harp playing in the background and a little dream scene, right? Okay, imagine. So we know last episode where we left off was Meleys and Rhaenys are dead. Okay, imagine. We had to get that news on the black side somehow, right? Imagine the guy writing in, they're in the middle of a small council meeting about something, unrelated to the battle going on because they don't know that it's finished yet. Guy comes in and says, Your Grace, news from the battlefield, Rhaenys has fallen, or something like that.
Right.
And then just the entire council just stunned at the fact that they've lost their greatest asset because they didn't think what happened there was actually going to unfold that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Just like show me where you're dropping the bomb into the middle of the episode instead of like giving me the lukewarm aftermath where we don't get to see this. Like we're with all of these characters in this episode after all of the events. We don't get to see them react. We're seeing them live out the half-life of those reactions, which presumably would have been bad. That could have set the tone for the entire episode. I mean, because at this point, the Blacks have taken a shot in the mouth. I mean, this is they should be reeling after this, and they kind of are because you see, Jace trying to go to the twins, and then ultimately them trying to figure out, okay, well, we need more dragon riders. We need to even out the playing field, but we could have done that a lot more effectively. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I feel like a lot of episodes in this show are just like them spending a lot of time in the aftermath of things, and it like even season 1, there's a lot of like funerals, and there's a lot of like, I mean, episode 1 of season 2 is everybody's reaction after Luke, and it's important for you to see reactions of things, but they spend a long time on not immediate reactions, but just like the sad aftermath. And it really slows down the momentum when we're supposed to be in the middle of a war. And it's frustrating to see. So Cam, what did you think the silence are doing here?
Those moments are all about dialogue. So if you want to explore the aftermath of all these events, that should be a showcase for dialogue. That shouldn't mean have your episode silent. I feel like I'm reaching, which I try not to do, but I'm reaching to try to meet the episode halfway here. There is a lot of this game, the Game of Thrones that we love to talk about in politic, a lot of that is conducted silently. And I think you could argue that where all of our characters are in this state of flux, everyone's taking L's, I think you could argue that their silence means different things. And as we watch them for these extended periods, we learn what each character's silence really contributes to in their interiority. We have Criston Cole and Alicent are both in a state of shock. That long, slow zoom on Alicent during the council meeting when she realizes she's sided with the people who don't let women talk. Mm-hmm. There's a shock there.
That was a good scene. I actually liked that moment. Yeah. I thought that was effective. Mm-hmm. It was like annoying in the context of the 1,000 other silent moments, but I did like that one.
And Criston has his PTSD after the dragon fight.
Sure.
Corlys and Helena are both silent in their overwhelming grief.
Sure.
Helena's still dealing with blood and cheese. Corlys, of course, has just received the news about Rhaenys. I think there's a silence in almost being cowed. I think it's an extension of Daemon's impotence that serves his silence in this episode. And that impotence now extends to Rhaenyra and might contribute to her silence. And even Aegon II, of course, he lost all of his power when Aemon turned on him last episode.
Yeah.
You could argue that his silence speaks to his position of powerlessness here. Or you could say, for the final kind of coup d'etat here, that Aemond can be silent because he's politicked everyone around him, where they vouch for and advocate for him to take the throne, and he doesn't have to lift a finger. So there's a power in his silence.
Yeah,
that's the
fair.
best I can do.
Yeah. I think it is a bit of a reach, but I imagine that might be the kind of thing they're going for. Because like I said, it's got to be intentional. They didn't just forget to write dialogue. Like, this was a choice they made.
The pattern is too explicit, I think. There are too many instances in this episode, but it does have an effect on an audience, which is why we asked this poll question out. Maggie has the results here. The question was, how did this episode strike you? Did you think it was exciting setup and characterization, or was it a series of missed opportunities and filler?
The audience, 62% said that it was answer B, a wasted opportunity. But 38% thought it was exciting setup and characterization.
Okay.
So I'm glad this worked for some of y'all. We do these polls on our Instagram and on our YouTube community page. So
Sure.
This is like the collated results together. But so I'm glad it's working for some people. If you are one of that 38%, please tell us what
Sure,
worked.
drop it in the comments.
Like I would love to know, because I'm happy that somebody enjoyed this episode more than I did, and I want to know what you liked from it. That helps me.
But let's move from these gloomy observations into something that really rallies the troops, something that excites all three of us. I'm so happy that I can finally introduce the grand return of my very favorite segment we did during our season 1 discussions, a little segment we here at Second Breakfast like to call Incest Watch.
Yes. Good old incest. It's been way too long since we've had true explicit incest on screen. This is great to see.
Alert!
I'm so glad we're back. We get more of Daemon's visions in this episode. We get a second Lena appearance in the same way we got a second young Rhaenyra appearance.
That's right.
We get more Alice Rivers witch hype. I wanted even more of that. And I think those visions could have been the engine of this episode if it were constructed better. I think that could have animated the plot, but
I agree.
Let us make lemonade. Yeah, exactly.
Alternate title. Motherfucker.
Perfect.
Let us make lemonade from these incest lemons. And if you
great.
think any line has made me happier to write in the outline in the history of doing this show, I almost italicized it. The question to you guys, before I get to my answer, just to really throw the meatball on the table, what does it mean for Daemon to have sex with his mother?
I was really trying to think about that, and not to get too Freudian with it, but what else is this for? Like, that's what this is, right?
I mean, I think you can go there.
Like, let's do that. So, not that I'm a Freud expert, but like, I feel like a lot of the problem with these visions, and this was not problem, the conceit of these visions, this was a question we asked last week, like, what's the point? Are these like what's going on? I think a big part of it is he is just like, doesn't know how to deal with his relationship with Rhaenyra. I don't want to say that he's viewing Rhaenyra as his mother, because she's his niece. So there's that. But Rhaenyra,
very different.
Rhaenyra is at this point in the position that Daemon's mother once was, which was sort of the person who
missionary.
Well, I don't know.
Oh, that was a bounce pass.
We've never seen it. I wouldn't know.
Oh, we saw it.
Oh my God! She's in the position of getting to
Use a different word.
She is. She has the ability to decide how much power Daemon has. Daemon's mother didn't decide which son was born first. She didn't decide that Viserys was born first, but still, she's the reason that Daemon and Viserys exist, and she's the reason that Viserys gets to be king and Daemon does not. So if we think about this mother figure as the one who is gets to decide what Daemon's fate is, I think that's sort of what's happening with Rhaenyra now, where she's the queen, but she could, if she was in her right mind, the way that Daemon wants her to be, could let Daemon be king, let Daemon be in charge, co-rule together or something, instead of just asserting her own, I can't say the word position now, I guess, her own position on the throne. She could be this decider of how much power Daemon gets.
An authority.
Right?
Sure.
I think that's a bit of a stretch. That's all I can think of. Why are you laughing?
Jesus.
Why are we still laughing? I don't understand.
Tristan, what do you think?
I think the audience will know exactly.
No,
why
I know what you mean, but I think that assumption is also in itself a stretch. But whatever.
Maybe I did like this episode.
There it is.
This is fun.
And she doubled down.
My God.
No, I don't know. The thing with his mom, I still think that these dreams are a little confused. I don't necessarily mean confusing to the viewer. It's up to interpretation for sure, but I think they're confused in that inherently the conceit of where Daemon's positioned in this episode and in this season so far is the writers don't have a whole lot of material to work with because they know he's at Harrenhal for this amount of time, so we got to justify it by giving him a storyline over there. Ultimately, like, that was for shock value, all right? It is pretty gross. I mean, maybe not that out of the line, not that out of line for a Targaryen in Westeros, but
True.
Still pretty. I mean, they usually don't cross that line.
Actually, I've never seen that line crossed in the Game of Thrones universe.
It's also unclear. I mean, yes, they say that you should have been first, you were the better son or whatever, but I'm not. There's not much else to draw from that. I mean, other than we know that he wishes that he had been king and not Viserys.
Yeah.
We saw that play out in the first season. Now, I understand we're watching a show. You got to signpost that kind of stuff every now and then. But I'm not sure why it was important to show his mom, whom we didn't meet in the first place.
Yeah.
So, like, it's not very meaningful because I just saw her on the screen. I'm like, oh, wow, she's hot. Like, who's this
Who's
from
this
the past?
lady?
And so it was like, it was a cool twist, like cool, but like, it was like, oh, ooh.
Yeah.
In the moment. But at the same time, I'm not really sure what's gained other than, now we know that he for sure wished that, and this like is not something that his mother told him. Like,
right.
We're seeing his id, right? The internal. This is the embodiment of what he thinks or believes in his heart, or at least in his most selfish moments, right? Is what he thinks, because we know he loved his brother. Ultimately he knows that his brother did a good job as king, despite the fact that he would have done things a little bit differently. I don't think he hates his brother. It's just one of those things that it's sort of teeing up to make us try to keep us guessing about where Daemon's loyalties lie and what he wants to do in the future. But I don't know how much I gained from that scene versus the one where he cuts Rhaenyra's head off, right? And doesn't look to feel too good about that, right?
Yeah.
That was a good sort of way to visualize that internal conflict that he's got, and really show us instead of tell us.
Yes.
The problem with this episode was that it was all about telling us, delivering exposition, setting up plans, but they did that through the lens of what we were just talking about before, which was silence. If you're going to tell us about stuff, you've got to talk about it. You've got to say it.
Can't just have people look meaningfully around. Yeah.
Like, I can settle for second best, but if you're going to make me settle for second best, at least give it to me.
Yeah. I mean, maybe if we like zoom out in it for a bit, maybe it's about like things don't go the way that he wants them to. Like, even in his weird vision fantasy, he can't even have a nice little sex dream because it turns out to be his mom.
We didn't talk about this pre-episode, and I haven't seen anybody bring it up on the internet since. When we were watching him make sweet, passionate love to his mommy, we got one scene where we saw his back. All right? Was anyone paying attention to this scene?
He had some kind of like scars on his back.
It looked like Greyscale. And I want to take this all the way back to season 1, like episode 3 or whatever, where he goes and kills the crab feeder. Remember whenever I said this? He's like doused in the crab feeder's blood.
For real.
Who had Greyscale.
That's a really interesting idea. And Greyscale makes you go crazy.
Yes. So between the witch and Harrenhal and my theory that he's got Greyscale, all of these things could be mingling together with his reasonable and justified misgivings about the current situation that he finds himself in. Maybe that's why things are getting extra spooky.
I really like that, and I think it kind of roots the supernatural that we keep sort of veering into with these visions, because without that, I don't really see where it's going. I'm not sure where the Alice, I mean, apart from what I know from the book, I'm not sure how much they've grounded the Alice Rivers witch thing. But what I played with the Freud part is, I agree that it's sort of redundant. They've made this point a bunch of times in the visions, but I think it's more of him trying on different hats and personalities. Maybe he'll be king. Maybe he'll tell Rhaenyra who's boss. Maybe he'll just to be loyal to her and serve the realm. We don't know yet.
Maybe he'll kiss his mom.
Right, but I think this is him playing another role. It's him trying to hit the problem from another angle.
Wow.
And this one,
Another position?
I mean, he's basically...
I'll see you guys next week. I don't think that we're going to be able to talk about anything else.
This is good. The worse the show is, the more fun we have.
Oh my God.
He's kind of adopting... You said that we've never seen their mother, him and Viserys. We've never seen their mother before this episode. We've never seen their father either. And the Freudian thing, you could basically read this as Daemon kind of adopting the role of their father.
Oh, for sure.
By being with the mother.
That's the Freudian theory, is that you
Right.
are jealous of your father. Yeah.
But his father would have been the king. And he's asking people to call him a king in this episode.
Sorry, I don't think their dad was king. Remember, the whole thing is that they had to choose. Their father died young. Their father never was king. Sorry.
Either way, he was in the kingly position
Okay.
at
sure.
some point.
Sure.
There's that word again. But he also would have been, your father, your male relatives become that sort of inevitable point of comparison as a masculine ideal as you grow up. So I think there's some of that relating back to the impotence that we can never get away from with this character. But it's also kind of a stealth intro here. I pointed out that we've seen young Rhaenyra twice. We've seen Lyanna twice. And it feels like we're kind of done with those. The three of us keep trying to manifest the final vision that will break him, and we want it to be Viserys.
Yeah.
The
Please,
only thing
please.
That's all we want. God damn it.
this vision of the mother, whose name is Alyssa, that does give us some breadcrumbs toward that prize, because she mentions this tragedy of Daemon being born second, and then she finally name drops Viserys. So maybe this is just a way of setting up a Viserys vision in the next episode,
Maybe.
because we really are moving closer and closer to that point.
Yeah.
Well, man, maybe it's what's setting the Viserys vision to be the thing that brings him back, right?
Yeah.
Instead of being the thing that like breaks him, maybe it breaks him in a good way, and it brings him back onto the side of the angels, or Rhaenyra in this case.
I like that.
But if they do not bring Viserys back, all of these visions are a waste of time. I'll be very irritated, and you can't do this without having that.
I agree.
Patty
teasing
Considine
us.
was such a treat in the
Yes.
first season.
I know. These visions are not in the books. I think the addition is really interesting, but it's not in the books at all. So I'm curious where exactly they are.
They got to
go.
stick the landing, or it all does
Yeah.
kind of seem moot. We asked a poll question about this, which might be able to wrap this section up in a little bow. Is King Daemon, as he calls himself here, as he styles himself, is he seriously considering usurping Rhaenyra, or is he just moping around for a little while?
Our audience thinks that he's moping. 60% said he's moping, but 40% said he is seriously considering usurping Rhaenyra.
Okay.
So I'm in the camp of moping because I just don't believe him because he's such a little, I don't know, a little twit.
Diva.
He's a diva, exactly.
The hair flips in this episode?
Yeah, so many hair flips. I've heard that Matt Smith is an actual diva about the wigs. He hates the wigs. It's so funny.
Wouldn't you?
So, I mean, yeah, and he's got a lot of hair. So anyway, it's funny. But yeah, so most of our
Cool.
most of our
They're
audience,
so cool.
Yeah.
The Targaryen look will never not be cool.
I mean, it's so true. It's
Yeah.
very, very cool.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So let's wrap this up by talking about Targaryens a little bit more. We've got a little state of the race. I want to see where the pieces are. We're 5 episodes in out of 8 this season. Only 3 left somehow. And I noticed this interesting parallel between our major players here. We've got Rhaenyra and we've got King Aegon II, and I think there's a parallel between them in this episode that kind of ties the whole season back together.
Okay.
I was noticing when I was going through the subtitles trying to see what the hell Aegon was mumbling there, when he says mummy, that's his only line in the episode.
Nice.
Just like Rhaenyra only had 1 line in the season premiere.
Oh, I want Aemon Targaryen.
Right.
Yeah.
And both lines are kind of vengeful / maybe pleading
And about
problematic.
motherhood.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're both reactions to pretty similar losses. Remember, each character...
Both caused by Aemond.
Sure.
That's so true.
And each
Yeah.
character has now lost a son. But I thought it was an interesting framing of these characters because it felt like they're kind of on the same roller coaster ride. They're both slipping. They're both frustrated. They both have these moments of vengeance. And as a question to you guys, if we're drawing the similarities between Rhaenyra and Aegon II, and we're escalating these tensions in their interpersonal lives, which one of them do you think is going to break first?
Physically, Aegon's not doing well. He's not doing well at all. But Rhaenyra is also like mentally struggling. She's very frustrated at her lack of, I mean, they're both in the same position. They're both frustrated that they can't do anything. And Aegon is so frustrated that he almost kills himself doing something. And so they're both like frustrated about their own inability to act, like because they're the sovereign. I think pairing them in this mirrored, echoey way is really smart because so much of the framing has been like Rhaenyra versus Alicent, which is great and fun in its own way, but like Alicent's not the queen, as we like very well established that this episode. So it's really Rhaenyra versus Aegon. So I like them kind of setting them up in that dual way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think, Tristan?
I think it's pretty clear that Aegon already broke, right? I mean, I don't see him being super effective from there on out. Not an apples to apples comparison. It is a more troubling sort of thought, because if the two principals on either side both feel helpless and they're who the war is being fought over and for, why does it feel like that? You know, why do they lack the agency to get things done the way that they want? Why can't they pull those strings a little better? And I know that that's tied up in the way it was written by George. By George.
I was going to say by George. That's exactly what I thought.
Anyway, so that was his intent in writing it and sort of creating this understanding that the paradigm really is that the figureheads can't do much. They put the people in places of power who they trust, and then you got to hope that they do the right thing. But it is an interesting thing to be viewing this fight through their lenses, and you know, they are the movers and shakers in this world, and even they feel like they can't get anything done. I think that's a big reason why this episode felt like a lot of wheels just spinning, because they haven't been able to militate in the same direction and get their forces to agree on one approach. I don't really like the way that it's really made Rhaenyra seem almost entirely powerless at her council. I think that doesn't make a lot of sense, because if they're not listening to her, who the fuck are they listening to?
Right. And it's frustrating the way that they framed this, because Aegon's whole problem, you know, pre-Rook's Rest was nobody's listening to me. I can't accomplish anything. And that's because he's ineffective as a king. He's not a very good ruler. He doesn't seem to be very smart. Like, he doesn't have the best ideas. He's not the best person to be in power. And so that's why people don't listen to him. But Rhaenyra is sitting there complaining that it's because of her gender. And I think that ends up making her look weaker, because like the only other comparison we have is Aegon, who is a weak ruler. Like, not because of an inherent identity trait, but because he like characteristically is not very good at it. And so it ends up making Rhaenyra look really weak in a way that we know that she isn't. And so that's why a big part of why I'm frustrated, like, obviously, like we talked about this, obviously women have it really tough in this world and people don't listen to or take women seriously, but Rhaenyra, the character that I know, can push past that and like is frustrated by it and battles with it constantly, but doesn't just sit there whining at the camera.
And by now should feel comfortable in that role.
Yes.
Because everybody who is in her council realistically has already overcome that.
Right.
They've already crossed that hump.
Yeah. They've already said yes.
Gotten over that hurdle. You know, they said, okay, yes, this is a woman. I'm electing to follow her.
Right. Right. She's painted like she looks so insecure.
I think that this character should be done more justice than that, because at this point we get that. We get that, like you just said, we get that that's what's going on in this world. The normal woman is facing a tougher, like, uphill climb to be taken seriously. We see that through Alicent.
Right.
We don't need to see that twice.
Exactly.
We see Alicent on that journey, and I understand the parallelism that they're trying to portray between these two friends. If that's where the framing of the show has gone, is that it's sort of these two versus one another. But that they're going through a similar feeling of inadequacy. But again, inadequacy is Aegon's storyline, and so to keep giving everybody the same kinds of story beats, it's not that it's lazy. It's just these characters have all been distinguished well enough and have their own issues and personalities, and it doesn't seem like they would all react the same way to being faced with the same either temptation or challenge, right? We saw Aegon. He felt like he couldn't do anything, so he jumps on his dragon. And then on the flip side, we see Rhaenyra feeling like she can't do anything, wants to get on her dragon, realizes that's stupid. That's a good way of using the parallelism. We get that tells us something about the character.
Yeah, she is restrained.
Here, we see both Rhaenyra and Alicent reacting effectively the same way to being told to shut up. I mean, Alicent doesn't, she just sits there and goes fugue, and Rhaenyra just goes, what would you have me do? And then goes off, and I guess from there is plotting with Jace.
Yeah, I guess. Her child
and has
son.
all of the moves that she makes in this episode has nothing to do with her counsel. It's just her son and her niece, right?
And who
she
sidekick.
uses as Miss Arya. She uses them to sort of go behind the scenes and try to affect some change, which just doesn't really seem like that character.
Right.
Ever since we knew her in from episode 1, she's always been headstrong, doing her own thing, being very effective on her own. And I understand why she's grating against her role right now, because she wants to continue to be that. But it seems strange that she wouldn't just do it anyway.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean she has to go fly a dragon into battle, but she could be going and doing some of these missions on her own.
I agree. It's a lot of that same like telling and not showing, like her saying, well, I can't do anything, and you're like, but why? And she's like, because I can't. And it's frustrating. What do you think, Cam?
Even in the way it's written, I think you could sell these sort of parallels more. I don't think this one line thing is really hit strongly enough for it to be a clean echo that most people are noticing, unless they're scrubbing through it trying to do a recap for a podcast. But even in the way you edit and you construct the episode and how you cut between the storylines, I think, Tristan, you used the word figurehead a minute or two ago, and I think you could argue, voice crack, that Rhaenyra and Aegon have both been reduced to that status here. But you could structure it in a way where we see cutaways to the characters that have usurped and defied them, and then you could draw a much closer parallel between Aemond and Daemon.
Right.
The two characters who have threatened to usurp them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's been done as well. I love this idea of staggered echoes between these two monarchs, but there's a way, I feel like if you set up this season properly, Aegon throwing himself into battle last week and being punished for it and losing, that should have felt like a cautionary tale that reverberated through to Rhaenyra, who wants to go do the same thing, who's chomping at the bit to go fight. But I didn't feel that in her conversation with Jace. I had to add all of that connective tissue in my head. Imagine, if you remember, I was pretty frustrated by how passive and inconsequential Rhaenyra felt through the Eric duel.
Yes.
Imagine if you'd put that later in the season when you had time to build up those characters so they meant something to the narrative.
Yeah.
Imagine if you'd put that in this episode and Rhaenyra would have been kind of stir crazy and gone for a sword and killed the survivor and done the morally ambiguous. Remember, I was pitching she kills the survivor, whoever it was, just to be safe.
Yes, right.
Would have been so much more interesting.
Would have been awesome.
And that would have been a clean parallel that people, watching HBO on a Sunday night could have made connecting this episode and last episode. I think there's a way to draw these comparisons, and I just don't think it's done here. Because you could argue that Rhaenyra has basically been usurped. No one in her council, we don't even know the names of the guys in her council, but we know that they seem to be strong enough to disrespect her at every turn and take control and question her constantly in all company. We know that Aegon, in this episode, looks like he's never going to have power again. I don't imagine Aemon's going to give it up. Almost did it again. I don't imagine Aemon's going to give it up without a fight. And I'm looking for Rhaenyra to break bad. I'm looking for her to make a big mistake in the same way Aegon did. I just don't think, for an episode that was all set up and moving pieces around the board, I don't think I feel excited about that. I don't think they are stoking the fires and teasing. Setup doesn't have to be boring.
I know.
And I think we all felt boredom during this episode. It does not have to be that way at all. But if I can move to sort of another angle on this, the last poll question we had was about Criston Cole. This is another sort of angle on the state of the race, where the war is right now. And he had this great speech to Alicent. It was one of the better parts of the episode, I think, where he was saying that the future of this war is all about dragons, with the implication that armies don't really matter at this point, so let a dragon rider take charge and we're all going to die. What did the audience think of that point? And then what do you guys think of that point?
So our audience said 40% of them think that Criston Cole is right and that it's all about the dragons going forward. But 60% of our audience said that no, armies, boots on the ground, that stuff does still very much matter.
Okay.
Which I think is I think is interesting.
Let's hope so for the sake of the show.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think it's unfair to pick one because I think really both of them in congruence matter. But I do think ultimately it's about the dragons. Like, you can have the biggest army ever, but if the other side is a dragon and you don't, I mean, come on.
I'm ultimately in agreement there. I mean, we see that really the only threat to a dragon is another dragon. So there's that understanding. But basically, whichever of those two dragons wins is going to then decimate the forces on the ground. So the men could win, but if the dragon loses, then it's effectively the same thing as the men losing, which is sort of what Criston Cole's getting at. And I'm glad that was an interesting character moment that they gave him.
Yeah.
Sort of this defeatism that we're not used to seeing from him, honestly. He's been super crotchety about clinging to his honor in whatever way that he can, but being really two-faced and evil about doing it. Seeing that this had an impact on him, the three moments that I can remember from Criston Cole so far this season are whenever he tells Eric to go kill his twin brother, and then whenever he gets knocked off his horse and goes and stares at Aegon in horror. Now this, where he basically says, well, you know what, it's really not up to us anymore, it's the dragons, and then he breaks up with Alicent. I mean, those are really the three character moments I remember that stick out to me at this point in time from him. So I think he's right. I think it makes sense that he, as somebody who trained his entire life for battle and knows what he's doing, sort of has it as his entire worldview flipped upside down.
Yeah, totally.
And that he would react that way from here on out. But
yeah.
But I don't know. I think what we've been talking about, we've been doing a lot of whining for the most of this episode. I think it's valid. I think these are valid criticisms because they come from a place of, I love this show. I want this to be so good every time because we know the potential is there. Mm-hmm. And what concerns me about this episode is we got basically two duds in a row in the first and second episodes. First being a little better than the second. And then 3 and 4 were really good. They were trending upward too. I think 4 was a little better than 3. 3 was a return to form. And after that climax of episode 4, we're sort of relegated back down to this ground zero. You know, we hit the Tetris and now there's no more blocks. And and we're just sort of, it's like that one meme where the guy has a stick and he's poking the thing and he goes, do something. That's why we just threw our characters out in, silence with nothing really to do. They moved the needle a little bit as far as planning for the next episode. It's just frustrating that seems to be the ebb and flow of this season, and maybe, I hope not, but maybe the series. Right? Because if that's what we're going to have to do every time to artificially raise the stakes up, is to sort of kneecap ourselves in the few episodes before to make the big episodes hit home more. When you've only got 8 episodes in a season, you can't afford to have what's been, 3 now?
Yeah.
Feel close to filler. This one is definitely filler. The other 1 and 2 were just not super well done. Why can't they all be 3 and 4?
Yeah, it does kind of make you feel like, oh, this is the status quo, and it feels like 3 and 4 are not outliers, but they're almost an exception. It is a little frustrating. To take it back to your dragon question, Cam, I actually do think if you zoom out big picture, dragons are important in actual battle for like winning. But then afterwards, what are you left with? If you've like decimated and alienated everybody in the 7 kingdoms, you're going to have a tough time ruling. So it is still about getting support. But what did you think about that question?
I think both of you had points. And to your point, Tristan, I don't think we've just been whining. We also did a lot of innuendo.
Yes, we did.
We did a lot of that.
It is. I mean, we do want the show to be good, of course, but it's also that we love Game of Thrones, and it's that we love the books. And the thing that kind of gets my girdle is that there's been an incredible, as much as I talked about the theme of silence through this episode, the title being the one word Regent. The thing that really bugs me, this is the 3rd Game of Thrones related episode that we're recording this week. Maggie and I we've already recorded Friday's episode, which is about the next Ned chapter in Game of Thrones. And we already recorded the next Fire and Blood volume, going through the source material for House of the Dragon. That was the second to last 2 chapters of the book. And so much of both of those episodes was about Regency and aristocracy and the silent levels of power and the corridors of power and the shadowy forces that conspire to control things. And they were done so incredibly well. The Ned chapter was literally 6 pages, and I could have talked about it for 10 hours. There's so much there, and George R. R. Martin is so good at talking about all of this. I don't know, it frustrated me a lot because, we don't see the title of these episodes when they go up. So we click on it, we're all excited. The episode ends, we're not excited anymore. And then I see that the title is Regent. And I've already spent 2 hours this week getting all excited about how incredible George R. R. Martin is writing and his thoughts about the concept of Regency are. I think that's why I was frustrated by this episode, because I know that all of the meat is there, all of the plot is there, and maybe that's what threw me.
Yeah, I'm
well,
with
why
you.
in the hell would you title this episode that?
Like I say, also it's not a good title. It's like that was like their placeholder title, and they just gave up. I was like
Like,
really?
I know
You couldn't even
Aemon's-
call it like the Prince Regent. Like, give it
That would have
some
been better.
flavor, man. Like just Regent. It was so weird.
Well,
So,
especially
yeah.
like yes, that's an important turn of events for the universe. The fact that we didn't really talk about Aemon this episode.
'Cause he's barely there, sadly.
It seems like he's going to be a decisive leader at the very least. I mean,
sure.
he's definitely seized power for himself and taken it away from his mother. And it was kind of cool that everyone else in there said it for him. He's such a good dichotomy against Aegon, because he doesn't have to, when he speaks, it has a purpose, and he doesn't have to claim authority. Other people give it to him.
For sure.
So it's cool to see that, but that's really as far as you can take Aemon. Maybe a little bit more humanization of him whenever he says, cut down the fucking rat catchers. It's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That tracks.
Sure, yeah.
Beyond that, I mean, if the writers and the showrunners want us to be on Team Black, calling this episode Regent is wholly green coded, and it doesn't even feel like the biggest thing that happened in an episode where not a lot of stuff happened. I don't know.
Yeah.
It clearly wasn't the focus of the episode.
Yeah.
No, not at all.
It is the biggest world building event that happened.
Right, like in terms of like the war, like politically that's a big move, but it didn't feel big in the episode.
Yeah, this was a tough one. I have
was.
high hopes for the next one.
Me too.
I
I
think-
always have high hopes.
And at this point, there are 3 left. We're going to start setting up the end game for the season.
Yeah, obviously big things have to happen, so let's keep it rolling, I guess.
Yeah, but the good thing is, regardless of the quality of the episodes, I love talking about it with you guys, so
we'll
I
always
still look
be
forward
here.
to all of this. So this was a lot of fun. And at home, thank you very much for listening, for supporting the show. Comment your thoughts and theories on all these little questions we ask throughout the episode over on Patreon. You can email us if you'd prefer that, or you can drop the comments on the YouTube video.
I truly want to know what y'all think of Daemon getting down and dirty with his mom. That's
Sure, what
that's
does
what
it
I
mean?
want to know. What does it mean? Is anybody
What's
in
your
here?
position?
Oh God! Is anybody here a therapist, a studier of psychology, a studier, student? You know what I'm saying?
Studier. Oof.
It's
Master's degree.
It is late at night.
Strong.
We've got that Fire and Blood episode live right now over on Patreon.
Yep.
This Sunday, we also have another bonus episode going live on Patreon talking about the 3 Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. We also interrupted our regularly scheduled George R. R. Martin programming to drop a special episode on Long Legs just yesterday, talking about the history of horror that we think is remixing and evolving. We talk about Dracula, Clockwork Orange, Silence of the Lambs. I get to throw in some Dr. Faustus. That's a really fun episode. And on Friday, we'll be back with a brand new episode talking about the next chapter of A Game of Thrones.